Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today is part two of our talk on personal resilience for Business Continuity Awareness Week. And I'd like to welcome back Jason Haas. Jason, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Looking forward to diving down this rabbit hole we're about ready to discuss for today.
Yeah, we're going to continue our talk from yesterday where we talked about personal resilience. And we're going to continue that with some more learnings and things that you've gone through in your life. So why don't I head that right back over to you?
Sounds good. And this one is relatively recent. It occurred the day after Thanksgiving in 2023, so not too long ago, and concluded the day after Christmas. So my father, who is a was more like it, a little giving away the end here. But anyways, my father, relatively obese man, always struggled with weight his entire life and health and all of those things. So during his retirement and everything, one of the routines he had at night is when he'd get ready to go to bed, he'd get up out of his chair, go throw away the garbage in the garage, and the garage is connected to the kitchen, 2 stairs down. That'll be prevalent here in a moment, and then go to bed. Backstory on my dad, I believe he was around 80 years old, if I remember correctly. And he also suffered from memory issues, health issues, things like that. So he wasn't in necessarily the best shape. So rolling back to the day after Thanksgiving, he was doing something he had done all of his life, again, throwing away garbage from the kitchen into the garage. And this time it was different. He lost his balance. And being unsteady on his feet, elderly and whatnot, there was no way for him to catch himself. And he ended up falling from the connected kitchen into the garage, going headfirst onto a concrete slab. Um, Bleeding profusely, so on and so forth. I'll let you create that mental image for yourself. So with that, it's just him and my mom. My mom, of course, panics like anyone would. I know I would. And of course, called for 911 immediately to get emergency services there. They scooped him up, stabilized him, got him into the ER, which, and at that point, he never really left the hospital for the next 30-ish days. So when my dad fell and had that traumatic head injury, it ended up breaking his neck. He was in a collar. He was, for the most part, nonverbal due to the swelling and the discomfort of the collar. Come to find out later, he had a latex allergy nobody was aware of, and the collar created some complications with that around swelling and whatnot. So as my dad entered into hospitalization through the emergency room, they do, of course, normal assessments and whatnot. We're not going to get into the details of that. And then from there, after he had all of his x-rays and the initial diagnosis, he was put into the trauma department within the hospital for additional care and analysis and observation. And that is where things got really complicated. My mom, also elderly and not always in the best of health, suffers from depression. It's something that at one point or time we all battle with in one way, shape, or form. And this accident and her witnessing that was extremely traumatic and put her into a tailspin of depression. So one of the first complications we had with elder care around this is getting my mom to get out of bed at a reasonable time. Most days it would be 2 p.m. before she'd be willing to get up out of bed and deal with this horrible situation. Um, so that was an initial, well, not initial, an immediate challenge that persisted through the whole 31 days of his journey to death. And that's where you learn a lot about things like power of attorney, durable power of attorney. There's a difference between the two and how it may vary from state to state, as well as HIPAA. Me and my brother, I'm out in Colorado. This happened in Illinois. And it's interesting when you can't be there to get onto the releases, trying to reach out to hospital staff to talk about parental's health status is really, really challenging. And when you can't get your mom to get out of bed, to get to the hospital, to do all the important paperwork, it's really, really hard. This is where the soft skills of resilience really come into play. You form relationships with the health aides, with the nurses, you send them treats, you buy them pizzas, you do whatever you need to do to somehow get that free flow of information. You build that trust. Not that we're violating HIPAA or power of attorneys, but there are gray areas that you can potentially play in, and depending how you develop that relationship. So this went on for all of December. My dad would get to the point of the hospital. The idea of the hospital is not for a long, in our experience, wasn't for long-term care. It was to get him well enough so he could be transferred to a recovery facility to continue his journey towards better health. But it was a yo-yo act that we would find is he would, as he was in the hospital, they would get him to good enough standards, enough to transfer him out. He would take his ambulance ride to a recovery facility, and the standards of care between the two were night and day differences. So even though he would leave the hospital in better shape that he entered, as soon as he entered into a recovery facility, typically there was a decline in his health due to lack of care. My dad couldn't feed himself, couldn't drink, couldn't use the facilities himself. He was 100% dependent on others. And we had challenges with that. Also, COVID's still a thing, just in case people think it's gone away. It's not. My dad also then contracted COVID from the alternate care facility. Their COVID mitigation standards weren't necessarily enforced or up to standards. A lot of unmasked faculty there and things like that as they would travel between rooms and all of that. So my dad eventually contracted COVID. So did my mom. Now we have isolation. Now my mom can't go see my dad. Now my dad's in a quarantine. He's bouncing between hospitals and recovery facilities and doing the whole yo-yo act of good health to not so good health to good health to not so good health. And during all of this, we worked through a ton of ambiguity, which we'll get to later in a different section. But the idea is, in all of this is think about the paperwork that will support the ones that you love. Do you have a will? Do you understand your spouse's or loved one's last wishes, their type of care they want? Do they want palliative care? Do they want to be on machines for the rest of their lives? What does that look like? So for me, the initial takeaway is I didn't know. I didn't know what my dad wanted. Things weren't really well documented. There was a lot of trust with my mom, and not that I don't trust her, but it's when it's in writing, it's a little bit different. When it's accompanied by his signature with a date, it's a lot different
Yeah.
compared to potential assumptions. Um, but that was what that was. So in all of this, paperwork became critical. And as I found out, each time you are discharged from a hospital and enrolled in another facility, all that paperwork resets. And when you return back to the hospital, that paperwork resets. So we were always playing a catch-up game of HIPAA releases. So me and my brother could talk about with the hospital staff. There were no power of attorney releases at that time. Illinois handles things a little bit differently. And to remove power of attorney from my mom or for her to share it, one, my dad would have to authorize that. He was incapacitated, so he would never be able to authorize that. Therefore, it would have to go through a legal proceeding, court case, judges, lawyers, all that fun stuff. And there was just no time for that.
Yeah,
So,
I had
yeah.
some of that same experience myself when my dad passed. He had no will, but I knew what his wishes were, and he never even had to verbalize them. We knew what they were, and it was to return him back to England, to be near his mom and his dad, and the rest of his family. That they were all buried in the same cemetery in the same village. Same actually for my mom, her mom and grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. They're all buried there. We knew that, and everyone deferred to me. My dad was not married at the time. My brothers didn't want to get involved, not in a way of helping out, but they didn't want to be the ones making decisions. So everything fell to me. Everyone deferred to me. Luckily, my mom had been through it because after my parents' divorce, she had remarried and had gone through other deaths and helped out. So she guided me along. But it's one thing to sit there and talk with your brothers and your mom about, these are the things we need to consider. What should we do? And then it's another to be the person who has to sit in front of the bank manager or the lawyer and say, this is what has to happen. And you go from having a network of talking like you and your brother to I'm there all alone right now in this office. and it's a very different feeling.
You're right, Alex. And, in my history of my family is, death is something that we can be guaranteed in life. I have a view of as soon as we're born, we're dying. However you want to look at that as you may be, death is a natural outcome of the process of living. Um, so in thinking of all of that and knowing that, family, other relatives, grandparents, and things like that have passed over the years, my parents sheltered me and my brother from these processes. So when it came to, all of a sudden administrating, care in my dad's journey, this was new to me and my brother. We weren't quite sure how to approach this, how to support this, and just eventually just had to lean into it and figure it out. And when you're dealing with, another family member who's significantly depressed, that offers additional barriers to the conversation, challenges that you have to overcome and find a way to talk about these heavy, challenging topics like, do not resuscitate, palliative care, hospice care. What does all of that look like? And, to give full credit to my parents, they handled, documented, and paid for and handled things from death on. Okay, everything was prepaid for the funeral. That we knew that he wanted to be oh, I'm going to say the wrong word. I'm going to say incinerated for lack of a better term. But that he was going to go through that process and that he'll be interned with my mother when she passes as their ashes are mixed. And the plot was already paid for and ID'd, identified the service provider to update the headstone. They were awesome from death on. But from pre-death, oh, horrible, horrible. And it's just those big lessons learned. You don't know what you don't know. And I grew up really fast that day when all of a sudden it was no longer I wasn't a son to my dad, but I was a healthcare administrator and helping him along his journey with the goal of getting him healthy and back home, but with the reality of this is a one-way trip.
Mhm.
And we need to be realistic about that.
And
Uh,
then you're
yeah.
helping other family members with that same thing.
Right. My family, which can makes of my mother, my brother, myself, and an aunt, I was elected project manager for all of this. We realized very quickly that we needed a single voice, somebody to organize the chaos, document things, follow through, hold others accountable for action items that need to get done. This is, to me, crisis management 101. So with my previous training and experience with resiliency, crisis, ITDR, pressure cooker type situations,
Yeah.
this wasn't much different. Just the stakes were very different. This isn't, standing up a server in a data center. This is, my dad. And it, it was really emotional, a lot at stakes, and just a lot of tears, and just, it was hard. But at some point, I made the decision to separate myself from an emotional state. This is no longer my dad. This is a client. And I'm helping this client in their journey, and I will approach it that way. Okay, what time do the nurses' stations roll over? Great. This is what time I'm going to call them. I'm dealing with a time zone change from Western time zone to Central time zone. We're not talking anything major there. It's an hour, but still something you have to be aware of. What is the nurse rotation? What do they like to eat? What are those little interests there where I might be able to bribe them? Who's the doctor on schedule that day? How can I get a picture of that whiteboard in his hospital room each day? Because that's where all the notes live. So, what family member or person can I dispatch there with a camera phone, a smartphone to take pictures as well as FaceTime? Technology. Oh my gosh, technology was such a huge part of this journey where me being remote, I could reach out and see my dad. I could talk with nurses. They could see me. We humanized the event where it's just no longer a voice on the end of the phone or an email. And we could see people, talk to people, and hopefully take action. And for me to see my dad and the extent of his injuries firsthand. On a funny note on all of this, my dad earned a nickname from the nurses, which was phenomenal. And we used it as what I titled the crisis. He was given the name Magic Mike. And
Hmm.
if anybody's familiar with what Magic Mike means, well, it's kind of like a stripper name.
Hmm.
And it's based off of a movie series of these very handsome men stripping for a living because my dad would constantly disrobe. Not that my dad was a handsome, fit guy like in the Magic Mike series, but man, that guy did not want to wear clothes. So each time nurses came into the room, he was completely disrobed. And yeah, it was an interesting experience, and we had a lot of laughs out of it. But the next part is how we manage family members, and we'll touch on that in a moment.
Well, let's end right there and then we'll come back and we will talk about that, how to deal and manage with family members. We're talking with Jason Haas today about personal resilience, and we will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody. Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, cyber, anything related to, forget that, I'll start over. I just realized this is part, I'm not recording for the show. I'm recording for Business Continuity Awareness Week. It's like, that's the wrong introduction.
Love it.
Oops. Oh, well,
Redo.
I'll save this. I'll put it at the end or something as something, you
I
know,
love it.
a duh moment for me. Okay, I'll start over. Okay, you ready?
Ready.